All right. Good evening, everybody. We are back for this is the part two of the critical race theory conversation that I promised that we will have in a couple weeks. We had to do a special presentation last week for honoring the birthday of Malcolm X. I hope that you all joined that one as well and saw that we put a lot of time and effort into that one. We really appreciate the audience that we had. A lot of people tapped in with us. But we're back talking about part two of this discussion of critical race theory. We got into a real good discussion last time, and we hope to have the same tonight. As always, you all are definitely welcome to join the conversation in terms of the chat. We'll get to your comments. We see some people already tapping in already. Christy, Karen, hello. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully, we'll have a lot of others that will come on tonight as well. But we're sort of light tonight. Like my brother Ike is running the show tonight. But we, as always, we're still going to come on for you. We definitely want to make it a good and intellectual conversation for you all tonight. If anybody is just joining us for the first time and never heard of 360, we are a group that's been around for more than 20 years. I know some of you are just now thinking we just got together a couple years ago. We started in 2020, but we've been around for a long time. We're basically, we're kind of sort of an activist type of a group. We're social commentary, political commentary that you'll hear us talk about a number of issues that we'd like to discuss. But we're basically here to motivate and to get you all active and to the struggle to get on the ground and really do something for change. So these kind of conversations are just what this is all about. It's about learning, but it's also what can you do to make changes in your local communities, your local constituents, depending on what type of level of involvement you are already, whether it be political, whether it be just your neighborhood associations, or it's just a small group of friends. It doesn't matter. We want to definitely stroke the minds and the inspire you all to be active. So we got a good show for you. We got a lot lined up. And I see a lot of you all are in here already. So yeah, Joe, Antoinette, Kokisha, Gorilla Details back. You were here last week. Aris, Jeffrey. Thank you all for coming on tonight. We'll get to more of your comments as we go along with the presentation. So Isaac, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, my man? It's good to be back. I'm sorry that I've been gone the past couple weeks. I've been missing you guys. I've been checking in on the conversation, and it sounds like you've had some delightful conversation the past couple weeks. The Malcolm X tribute was amazing. So look, man, I'm just glad to be back in the fold tonight and looking forward to jumping into this conversation. And like you said, for those that may not know, we specialize in having open, critical dialogue about issues of race and skin color. So this is a non-judgment zone. This is a judgment-free zone. We have very strong beliefs, Grant and I and the rest of our group, 360 Collective. But that doesn't mean that we can't disagree, and it doesn't mean that we don't respect people who come onto the program and have different views. So if you're here tonight because you're curious about critical race theory and simply you want to learn more about it, ask questions. If you're here because you think you know what it's all about and you strongly disagree with it in practice and in theory, we want to hear your thoughts. We want to have an open dialogue. All thoughts here are welcome. As long as you keep it kind, you keep it intellectual, and you keep it respectful. We're here for your views. We're here for all of it. We want to build with you, construct with you, do knowledge with you. If we disagree, we want to disagree with you, find common ground, and find a way forward, because we believe that is the only way that true revolution can happen, is when we listen to one another and learn to understand one another and talk with each other friendly, in solidarity and in camaraderie. So that's what I'm looking forward to tonight, my good brother. Well, what do you think, man? We ready to go?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. So then the first question that we have for our group and for the conversation tonight is exactly what is critical race theory. So we have a series of clips that we're going to play for you tonight. Some of them are experts or the originators in the field of critical race theory. And then we also pulled some clips from a guy named John Oliver, who has a show, I believe it's on HBO. He did a really great segment on critical race theory. We're going to borrow a few of his segments and break them down and elaborate upon them. But we thought he did such a great job that we wanted to use maybe about 2 minutes from the segment he did on critical race theory, in addition to about 6 minutes of other content from other places. So we have expert analysis, we have social commentary, and then we will provide you with our own analysis as well. And along the way, as Grant mentioned, we hope that you comment, react, join in the conversation as we go. So without further delay, let's get into the first clip answering the question, what is critical race theory? This first clip comes from a gentleman by the name of Ibram Kendi, who is both a historian and a well-known anti-racist. He leads a think tank at Boston University focused entirely on anti-racist practice, policy, and so forth. And he did an interview with a group called Now This. So we're going to play part of that interview answering the question about what is critical race theory. So let's do that now.
Critical race theory is an intellectual sort of field that emerged in the late 1970s and early 1980s among legal scholars and lawyers who were recognizing that racial disparity was persisting despite the public pronouncements that all these laws on the books were race neutral. And so these scholars recognized that something was wrong here and that they had to take a new critical approach to examining the law, to examining policies, to examining structures which they recognized were the source of these continuing disparities and not what's wrong with people.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that was a good first clip. And I know somebody said the first time watching they're not really sure exactly what someone's not really sure what critical race theory is. So we'll be able to answer all those questions tonight. For those who are just joining this part 2, but we have no problem going back and explaining some things. But yeah, I mean, I think he gets into basically a little bit about we talked about the first conversation about what is critical race theory. It's the misconception that we need to really talk about here, and that we really want to drive home so people are understanding that the critical the need for this the misunderstandings and the folks that are basically combating critical race theory, and to really expose them and understand that this is something that is basically done on purpose, and we need to, and that's really why we're here tonight to talk about that. So take it away. I want to dive into some of these comments while you're talking.
Okay, sounds good, bro. So I'll react to that clip, and then if there are comments that you want to jump into, we can do that right after. But Ibram Kendi does an excellent job there of outlining the origins of critical race theory. The critical race theory began among scholars, legal scholars in law schools across the country, who many of whom had fought during the civil rights movement to desegregate bus stations, to desegregate schools. Derek Bell, for example, was one of the chief originators of critical race theory. He worked for years and years and years for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He was part of the Legal Defense Fund team when that team won the desegregation case in the Montgomery bus boycott led by Dr. King in 1954 and 1955. And so these scholars, these lawyers, had grown frustrated with the progress into the late 60s and early 70s that had been so progressive during the civil rights movement itself. And they began to wonder, how is it that we could have destroyed and abolished all of these laws that were segregating people based on race, that were subordinating Black and brown people based on race, and yet we don't see much change in the social and economic conditions of Black people in America. And so what these scholars began to do was to analyze current policies, to try and trace how current policies, not those that had been abolished, but current policies were contributing to inequality, inequities in society, home ownership, in the legal and justice system, the wealth gap, the achievement gap, all of the different inequities that still existed going through the 1970s that theoretically should have been done away with as a result of the abolishing of Jim Crow laws and segregation laws. And so that is first and foremost what critical race theory is. It is a way that lawyers, professors, and specialists who analyze public policy and laws can identify how laws and policies are contributing to racial inequities today in America. That is first and foremost what critical race theory is. Any reactions in the chat, Grant, before we jump into the next clip?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what Jeffrey Whitaker had to say, that, you know, the reason why he's here is to find out what critical race theory is and what our angle is for promoting as a good thing, because he listens to conservative right-wing radio and they say how awful it is. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is combat these conspiracies, if you will, or these lies they're telling about how awful it is, when in fact the real reason is they want to keep things under wraps. They don't want the truth to come out. They want to hide history. And we talked very strongly about that last week, of how ridiculous it is and how you just can simply just kind of erase history as if things has never happened and act like we all just arrived on this land all together as one 2 years ago. Like, I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. History is history. The past is the past. And what the right-wing media and conservatives are trying to do is say that basically, you know, this is a bad thing. We don't even include this as teaching hate, as DeSantis, the governor DeSantis is trying to say. They're just teaching children to hate one another. That's far from exactly what this is. So that was a good comment from Jeff. I see somebody replied to it. The problem is, Rome says the problem is when those race-based laws were abolished, new laws and policies were created to keep the status quo. Yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah. First off, Jeffrey, I'm glad that you're with us. Stick with us, because we have more content that speaks to some of what it is it sounds like you're hearing on the radio. So I'm very appreciative that you're here. And I know that whatever questions or reactions you have, those that are following in the chat will definitely build with you, connect with you, comment with you, and we will try our best to respond to any questions that you and, of course, the rest of our audience have. So thank you for being here. It is absolutely right that when racist laws were abolished, not enough was done to combat the inequities which remained in place. And so a great example that Derek Bell talks about a lot is the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, and the 14th Amendment provides equal protection under the law regardless of race. This amendment was passed, I believe, in 1865 or 1866, or was added to the Constitution, I should say. States should have then theoretically passed laws as a result of that, and the federal government should have passed laws as a result of that to ensure access to voting, access to education, and so forth. That didn't happen. And so even though the 14th Amendment should have abolished all race-based laws and legislation in this country, it didn't. Even though the law was written into the Constitution, racism persisted. And so that is one of the key points of critical race theory as it is defined, which is that simply writing a law, simply stating in a policy that this, that, or the third is not allowed or should be happening, doesn't mean that it necessarily will. It also means that racism itself isn't necessarily an issue of hating a person because of their skin color or thinking of other people as less because of skin color. It's simply allowing for systems, policies, rules, and regulations, which have always created inequality, to continue to function and to continue to operate. It's allowing the system that has not been transformed, not been reimagined drastically enough, to continue to produce inequalities in our country. And one could do that simply by not knowing, not understanding the impact that rules and regulations today, or rules and regulations even 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, are still having on society today. So let's jump into the next clip, because the next couple clips will explain more of this. So the next clip is Derek Bell, who is one of the chief theorists, one of the originators, one of the founders of critical race theory. As I mentioned, he was a lawyer for the NAACP legal defense funds for years and years. He worked to desegregate counties, municipalities all over the country, and then he became after that a professor, a legal professor in law school. So let's listen to what he has to say about how critical race theory came to be.
The amazing thing is the strength of the belief in the law. That if you once got the court to say officially, which is what we knew from experience, that then there would be compliance. That white folk who had been benefiting would now, that the law was clear, that the court had spoken, would, with some, foot dragging and all, go along with the law. Thurgood said schools would be desegregated in 5 years. But we all believe that this society, when the court spoke, was going to shift. And Carter writes years later that we thought segregation was the evil. We came to see that segregation was a manifestation of the real evil, racism.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example there. That's Derek Bell talking about the efforts in the 1960s to desegregate and to attack Jim Crow laws with the belief and with the intent that would eliminate racial inequality in America. And he talks about a conversation that he had with Thurgood Marshall, who said that within 5 years of Brown versus Board of Education, he predicted that schools would be completely desegregated as a result of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And school segregation lasted well into the 1970s. And you can make the case today, schools are still very much segregated, not by law, but in many other ways, which is precisely Derek Bell's point, which is that segregation laws no longer exist, but the quality of education that Black children in America experience compared to that of white children in America is still unequal. There's still an inequity there. The amount of money spent on the education of a Black child in America still trails drastically, I might add, that of the amount of money spent on the education of a white child in America. And so those sorts of inequities have nothing to do with segregation, have nothing to do with Jim Crow laws, and have everything to do with the way schools are funded, with the policies that allow for children who grow up in one part of the country to receive a lesser or a second-rate education compared to those who grow up in another place in the country or in another zip code in the country. Any reactions, Grant? You want to jump in on that, or anything else you want to call out in the chat?
That's a good point. I mean, that's to the core of what the critical race theory is anyway. That basically the race is a social construct, and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but it's something that's embedded in our legal system and policies that you just kind of mentioned here. And so that's what this fight is. It's not just calling out, it's about fighting these laws that we supposedly have abolished. We know the Jim Crow era is, supposedly the laws are gone, but the effects of it are still here. And they're not going anywhere unless we do something about it. So, I mean, we know this is even happening even before the 1970s and 1980s when this was even created more than 40 years ago. We can go back to the 1930s. When we had government officials literally draw lines around areas deemed as a poor financial risk And due to the racial composition of of where these people lived at, the bank subsequently refused mortgages to Black people in those areas. So if you're able to do those kind of things, why not have this conversation? Like this is history. This is what happened. Okay, we're not trying to deny it and that time came and went. No, it's still prevalent today. Subprime mortgages and all those type of redlining is still going on today. We just had an issue with one of the banks denying refinancing. I think it was Wells Fargo. Yeah, denying Black and brown people to get a chance to refinance their homes. So this is why we're having. This is why we're trying to break down the lies and what critical race theory is really trying to get to everyone is that we have a lot of work to do. There's still some laws and things that we need to break down, some policies that are affecting Black and brown people at a higher rate. And education definitely is high on the list because we understand that, Black and brown people are receiving not the best quality education due to these policies in place. So yeah, that's a good clip. I think people in the comments are getting into the same kind of conversation as well. I did see one one comment that I wanted to point out because I think that's one of the things that we're hearing from Cheryl. Excuse me if I get your last name wrong, but Cheryl Heininger, I think is what it is. So yeah, it says our school boards are being clobbered by the claims that CRT is being taught. What is actually being taught is looking at reality and critically thinking about the whys. It's not to make white people feel guilty or shaming the white race. It's to look at the systems and asking questions. Exactly. That's a great point. Because what we're seeing now, they're trying to flip the script and say that, now it's racist. You're being a racist towards me now, which is completely ridiculous. So you're having white guilt step in, and now they feel like they're being attacked. The critical race theory is all about trying to teach hate and to hate white people. And that's not what it is. It's simply conversations that need to be had. And sure, that was a great comment.
Yeah, and Grant, I think you touched on two things that I want to react to. First off, critical race theory teaches that race is a social construct. And I want to elaborate a little bit on exactly what that means. When critical race theorists state that race is a social construct, what that means is that a person's intelligence, a person's abilities, a person's culture cannot be predicted based on their race. It means that there is nothing wrong or right with a person based on the color of their skin. This is a scientifically proven fact. A person is not born more or less intelligent based on skin color, not more or less able physically based on race or skin color. A person is not born with more or less propensity for violence or for organizing based on their skin color. There's no correlation between one's intellectual capacity and their skin color. There's no causation between one's intellectual capacity and skin color. Therefore, if we all agree, and I think most people on the right would agree with this assertion, that race is a social construct. Race does not define a person's abilities, their intelligence, or their propensity for one thing or another. Then that means that any inequality that we can see based on race in America must be based on something that is by definition racist. It must boil down to a policy that is impacting one group of people negatively more than another. And I can't stress enough that this has nothing to do with intent. Absolutely nothing to do with intent. So when I, as a white person, see inequitable outcomes when it comes to college graduation rates, college matriculation rates, I'm an educator, and the so-called achievement gap between Black children and white children in America. No part of me at all thinks that Black children are less intelligent than their white counterparts. No part of me at all thinks that Black children simply need to take education more seriously. No part of me thinks at all that Black parents need to be more involved in their parents' education. My assumption is that Black parents, just like white parents, want the best for their children, and that Black children want to learn every bit as much as their white counterparts. Therefore, the inequity that I observe between Black children and white children when it comes to education must be the result of something else, some policy, some rule, some regulation that's on the books in some place or another, or every place. In America, we know that funding for schools is based on property tax, almost everywhere in the country, right? Let's trace the origins of that policy and let's discover where it comes from, and let's figure out how that policy has impacted families, Black families and brown families here in America. And so as a white person, I may feel guilty that these inequalities exist, but the intent of exploring these inequalities is not to make me as a white person feel uncomfortable or feel ashamed or to blame me, Isaac Castellaz, for the inequality that is observed and is very real in our country. And so there's nothing wrong with white guilt, with getting upset about the inequality, right? Once you recognize it. What's wrong is when you stop there and you let your guilt simply fade away, because ultimately the inequality that you're observing, the thing that you're taking note of, doesn't negatively impact me as a white person. So if I do nothing, I'll still be fine. I'll still be fine because the policy isn't designed to hurt me. It's not doing me harm. And so if I let my anger over this policy stop at my guilt, then that means I have allowed for this policy to continue, right? And so every person has a responsibility to contribute to the abolishing of racism in this country. When we allow the system to function without challenging it, without questioning it, then when we remain in a neutral state, then that means these policies will continue to oppress, continue to marginalize, continue to produce inequalities. And so I want to stress to my white friends out there who are curious about critical race theory, no part of critical race theory is designed to point a finger at you and to call you a racist. It is simply to trace and to understand the origins of policies that today are producing inequities. Let's jump into the next clip there, Grant.
Okay.
This one is from Kimberly Crenshaw, also a founder of critical race theory. So let's jump into that.
Critical race theory just says, let's pay attention to what has happened in this country and how what has happened in this country is continuing to create differential outcomes so we can become that country that we say we are. So critical race theory is not anti-patriotic. In fact, it is more patriotic than those who are opposed to it, because we believe in the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment. We believe in the promises of equality, and we know we can't get there if we can't confront and talk honestly about inequality.
Wow. I'm glad I'm going to just pick on one word she said. And that is that this is the word patriotic. It's so true. It's so true when it comes to, especially when it comes to Black folks in this country who have given so much. You know, this is, and then you know, have died in wars, have fought on the front lines for this country, and to have this conversation to say that you're not being patriotic because you're engaging in critical race theory is ridiculous. Because we do believe in those. We do believe in those amendments. We do believe in the Constitution. We do believe in this country. It's just having the fact that that from a historical context and from the aspect of, hey, we really need to talk about these policies. We need to sit around and talk about what's wrong in this country, and that race is attached. It's a social construct, but we understand that there is racism. We understand that there are there are laws and things that need to be talked about and combated that are against Black and brown people, that are against people of color. Yeah, I was reading Jeffrey's comment. Why don't you read? What, I was going to say so. I want you. What's your take on that first?
Yeah, and so I think what Jeffrey is referencing is some of the language that I hear on the right a lot of the time, which is that, like, white supremacy. And so we have to be very, and this is something that Ibram Kendi does in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Every one of his chapters defines very clearly what he means by certain terms. And so when we talk about white supremacy, in one way, we can think of white supremacy as people who get swastikas on their chest, shave their head, wear Doc Marten boots, join the Ku Klux Klan, use racial epithets, and so forth, right? Like, white supremacy can exist in that sense. But there's another sense, which I think is more important for us to understand when we say white supremacy, which is systems, policies, or attitudes which promote whiteness, which promote European values over all others. And so white supremacy isn't necessarily a disdain, a condemnation, or a hate for all things non-white. It is simply allowing for policies, rules, and regulations to exist that have historically benefited white people, even though most white people themselves maybe had no idea that the policy existed or even wanted the policy to exist. The other thing that's important to note about critical race theory is that it speaks of whiteness as almost like a property. And so we hear the word white privilege, but in critical race theory, white privilege is used sometimes. Sometimes you hear whiteness referred to as a property, because it was the idea of whiteness in this country was created in order to establish a social order in which even poor white people could enjoy some access to wealth, to employment, perhaps even to property that Black people in this country or brown people in this country could not enjoy. And that in so doing this, in creating this social order based on whiteness, white people at the bottom associated and identified themselves more with rich white people than with other poor people of different colors. And that is why today, many people on the right, many of Trump's most avid supporters, are people who are on welfare, are people who don't have a lot of money themselves, but they see more in common with Donald Trump than they do with the Black family that lives across the tracks, only by virtue of the fact of their skin color. That if those two families ever began to talk and discover their commonalities, they might understand how this entire system has been created not simply to benefit white people, that's much too simple of a way to describe it, but to benefit rich white people, to keep wealth within the hands of a chosen precious few, and to withhold that wealth even from other white people. And so that, I think, is one of the things that we get stuck on when we talk about white supremacy or racism. Racism isn't necessarily the act of calling somebody a racial epithet or wanting to live in a different neighborhood than people who look different than you. It is allowing for certain policies, rules, regulations to continue to exist in this country without even knowing that they exist in the first place, right? It has nothing to do with your own intent, your own beliefs about people of different races or skin colors. It has to do with the policies. It's much more productive to start to discuss policies, rules, and regulations as racist than it is to describe people or groups of people as inherently and fundamentally racist. And critical race theory never has done that, But yet many on the right, and we'll hear from them later on, would have you believe that critical race theory believe that all white people are racist, that all white people should be blamed for the inequalities that exist today. And that's simply not true. In terms of the pull yourself up by the bootstraps comment, That's a myth in this country that we love to propagate. That with hard work you can make it. You can make it if you try. If you just work hard, you work 50, 60, 70 hours a week, find 2 jobs, and someday you'll own the beautiful house that you see on TV. That's a myth. That's a myth. It works for some people, but it does not work for everybody. And when you inject racism into this idea that if you just work hard in this country, you can overcome racism. Some people can, and other people don't. And so so it's true. There are successful Black people in this country. That doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. It means that those Black people, those people of color, have worked exceptionally hard to overcome not only the natural challenges that exist in this country, but the challenges of growing up Black or brown in this country. So it isn't to say that Black people can't thrive in this country. It's to say that when Black people in America thrive, it is in spite of racism. It isn't because the bootstraps mentality complemented them. It's because they overcame the racist obstacles that exist in this country. One of the great examples that we talk about all the time is the Homestead Act of 1862, when this country colonized land in the West, took it away from Native Americans, and gave it away, literally gave it away to white settlers. Blacks were excluded from the Homestead Act. There were colleges set up so that people interested in developing and taking control of land could learn how to do that. There were hundreds of land grant colleges, many of which still exist today, that were formed to give white people the education they needed in order to till the land, grow the land, develop businesses, and so forth. That isn't pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. That's your government helping you to succeed. After World War II, the GI Bill systematically gave out loans, credit, low interest loans, and money to white GIs, but Black GIs, very few had access to that same program. And so that isn't pulling oneself up by the bootstraps. That's being able to take advantage of a government program that benefited people in this country, white people in this country who are coming back from war. So those are 2 very obvious examples of why the bootstraps mentality in this country is a myth, frankly, in many ways. So that's my reaction to that. Anything else that we want to call out in the chat there, Grant?
I just want to let everybody know we aren't watching. It's a lot of you guys going back and forth and replying to each other. That's great. We'll get into these comments more as we go along. Let's get into that next clip.
Okay, got it.
The Western culture and values that brought forth Christianity in the founding documents are being called evil and racist.
I am not co-parenting with the government. It is not your job to force these ideas onto my child.
The narrative in this country is that we're all inherently racist, and I'm about sick of it.
It's a Marxist ideology, and we all know it.
All of these lessons have the intent to make our children feel disgust towards our nation.
This country isn't even a racist country. We elected Obama for 2 terms.
We elected Obama for 2 terms. That makes us not a racist country. Wow, that's hilarious. Yeah, those reactions are a lot of people who are miseducated, misinformed, and that's one of the other reasons we're talking tonight is to inform you all and to educate you all what critical race theory is. And I'm sorry if it comes across like the truth, because the truth comes across a little harsh, or it seems to be like, wow, those laws actually existed. That actually took place in this country. Well, facts are facts. You can't somehow erase it. You can't somehow just act like it never happened, because we're still being affected by those laws and policies that were put in place, at that particular time, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's not like we're in some brand new country, like the U.S. to start over from scratch, and that there was no such thing of any of this. then we can have that kind of conversation. Like, it was all made up. We're talking about some type of fictional characters of some sort. Like we're actually navigating through some type of science fiction movie, if you will, or something, or the children were made to read a book that totally made up all these the Jim Crow laws, totally made up slavery. And then we can have a conversation of, why are you introducing these things that never happened in this country, and you're forcing my child to read this book? We can maybe have that conversation. But the fact of the matter is, these are true accounts. This is history in this country. Yes, these are actually some of your relatives that were involved in this. Yes, some of your relatives are still alive and well that were involved in lynchings. Yeah, there are people who are in your family that are still benefiting off the backs of slaves. They have passed that generational wealth time and time again. You're still buying from companies that also benefited from slavery as well. So we have folks that are locked up that are part of my ancestral line. They were locked up in jail and prison due to unfair policies and laws. Yes, I still go to the Black community, into the hoods, if you will, the ghettos, and they are there because of redlining and all type of bogus loans and racism as well, because they're pocketed and segregated in these areas. They have been so for the last 60 to 70 to 100 years. So because of that all exists, we have to have this conversation, and we have to include critical race theory into the public school system and have the conversations. And it didn't start in the public school system. That's not where it came out of a college. Derek Bell's a college professor. He's an attorney. So he's one of the founders. So it's trickled down into the school system, and now it's something that it's a bad thing.
Yeah, and I want to clarify something that I want to clarify something, Grant, that was really apparent in that clip. And it goes to what you just said about critical race theory in schools. Critical race theory, there are no critical race theory classes in elementary school or in high school, unless we're talking about a high school that has a concentration on law. There are no schools, public schools in America, that teach a critical race theory class to children. And there was a great question in the chat about, well, where did the misinformation come from? What you're saying about critical race theory, Ike and Grant, seems to be very different than what people in this clip and people maybe in my community are saying, or in the media are saying about critical race theory. That's a great observation, because what we're going to learn in just a few more minutes is about how critical race theory became a topic of conversation nationally. Because teaching history in this country, in schools, and teaching the history of slavery, for example, is not critical race theory. Simply talking about the racist things that happened in our past, or simply talking about Thomas Jefferson's authorship of the Declaration of Independence on the one hand, and his ownership of enslaved people on the other hand, that's not critical race theory. That's just the study of history. That's just the study of the past. That is not critical race theory. Critical race theory is an intellectual approach to studying policies, rules, laws in this country. Now, can critical race theory be applied to other places outside of the courtroom? Absolutely, it can. But simply teaching the history of this country and how different people of color in this country have been disenfranchised, marginalized, and oppressed based on skin color is not critical race theory. It's a critical teaching of U.S. history, but it's not critical race theory. And so every conversation you hear about, well, we don't want our kids feeling uncomfortable because they're learning about slavery, or because they're learning about Jim Crow laws, or they're learning about inequalities between people of different races and skin colors. That's not critical race theory. That's just people who don't want to talk about race. And that's what we cannot lose sight of. And that's the thing that folks on the right who have propagated this controversy want us all to miss, in addition to some other really important things that are happening in states where critical race theory is heating up. We're going to get more into that in just a second. So I'm glad that our audience is thinking about that and catching on to that in these clips. Let's jump into one more clip, and then Grant, you may have some more comments that you want to highlight. Let's just listen to one more clip. This goes back to the question, and I'll put it back up, about what do people get wrong or right about critical race theory. So let's listen to one more clip.
That critical race theorists argue that white people are inherently evil. That's not true. That critical race theorists argue that everything and everyone is racist. That's not true. Critical race theorists would be the first to say there are people battling and challenging racism. And then those are the people we should learn from. That people imagine that critical race theory is widely taught in schools. It's not even widely necessarily taught in law schools where it originated, where people want it to be taught, let alone in elementary schools. Another misnomer about critical race theory or even anti-racism is that it's anti-white or racist. And I don't think people realize that that is one of the oldest and most vile white supremacist talking points.
Yeah, so you can see what's been propping this up. And yeah, definitely good points that you made, Ike. I mean, there are all type of misconceptions. Is the reason why people are getting this all misconstrued, because you're listening to so many different people who have their own take. And as you saw those women up there testifying, saying, this is a Marxist idea, this is that, this is, totally misinformed. And no, they don't want their children to be involved in something like that, because they think that what they are, yeah, you're right. What they are fearing is that they're going to learn the truth about the history of the country. That's what they're concerned about. And somehow it's going to flip, and white people are going to be seen to be the racist people, and whatever the case might be. They're very sensitive to all that because they're worried about the historical aspects of race. When you're right, this is more so about policy, laws. These are things that, and again, that's why I started with a law professor. And these laws need to be talked about. We're still suffering from these laws. We're still in the same boat in many ways. So I see there's some back and forth conversations in the comments. I think Jeffrey is having a debate with us here. I see him a few times commenting. I don't know if you want to pull up some of his. And okay, I see you did respond to him.
Sure, I can pull one up.
Okay.
So he says there might not be a class per se, but teachers are low-key indoctrinating kids based on their ideology. And so the thing there, Jeff, is in what way? Because is it possible that there are teachers somewhere who are propagating something that may be improper to their class? That's entirely possible. Entirely possible. But that's a problem across the country. Like teachers not following the curriculum or injecting their own beliefs per se, or maybe teaching something improperly, or like maybe a teacher authentically saying to their white children, you should feel really bad about this. How do all my white children feel about the fact that their ancestor did this, then? Like that could actually be happening someplace. But that doesn't mean critical race theory is the problem. It means that teacher is the problem. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that teachers are just as much saying things to Black children or to children who may identify as queer or who are questioning, oh, well, the Lord says that you being gay is this, that, and the third, right? Like, when we talk about teacher quality or when we talk about indoctrination, like to me, my child being taught in school that marriage is between a man and a woman, that's indoctrination. My son may grow up to be gay. He may be gay right now. And so when he hears his teachers tell him that marriage is to be one way and not another, that immediately makes him feel different about himself. It makes him feel insecure. I want my child to be taught that people identify in different ways. Men can marry men. Women may marry women. Love is love. That's the message I want my child to get, because I don't want someone else's religious teachings brought into the classroom telling me how I must teach my child or raise my child. I want my child to have an education that is inclusive, that shows multiple different perspectives about different experiences in this country. I don't want this country's history whitewashed, because I think that propagates avoiding conversations. In fact, let me show one particular thing. So when we talk about children being too young to learn about race or racism in this country, let me pull out one thing that I think is important for us to get across to folks. And that is that children identify skin color as young as just a few months old. All right. And as a result of that, they begin to form racial schemas based on race in their minds from birth. And then all the way through their continuum as young as age 6. You can see that by age 6, explicit conversations with 5 to 7-year-olds about interracial friendship can dramatically improve their racial attitudes in as little as a single week. Right? So this is a 6-year-old. And so if what we're saying is that children shouldn't be taught about race or shouldn't be taught about skin color in this country and how it has impacted everything around them, or if we shouldn't pay special attention to skin dynamics of skin color in this country, then what we're saying is that we want to continue with the status quo in this country, which is to allow racism to persist and to fester. So anyone who wants to abolish and get rid of and eradicate racism and white supremacy in America should want for our children to learn about race and skin color, know how to approach it, know how to form relationships with people of different races and skin colors from a very young age, because kids are learning it. They're making sense of it, whether we mean for them to or not. Any other reactions you want to call out, G?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I touch a little bit more about the education system, how this got involved in K through 12 in the first place. And so, so scholars who even study critical race theory in education, they look on how policies and practices in K through 12 contribute, as you said before, to persistent racial inequalities in education. So that's the piece we haven't talked about much either, is the fact that you touched on some of it in terms of funding. That's definitely an issue, but we have to find ways to change those inequalities. So among the topics they studied were racially segregated schools, the underfunding of majority Black and Latino school districts, the disproportionate disciplining of Black students, got to talk about that too at some point, the barriers to gifted programs in selective admission high schools, and curricula that enforce racist ideas. So critical race theory is not a synonym for culturally relevant teaching, which emerged in the 1990s, but this teaching approach seeks to affirm students' ethnic and racial backgrounds and is intellectually rigorous. So, but it's related to one of the aims to help students identify and critique the causes of social inequality in our own lives. So, so it's two, so that's kind of how it got into it. And of course, the 1619 piece we haven't got to yet also was how this all flared up. But I want to those who are wondering, why are we talking K-12? That's how it really got involved in terms of, well, look, these school districts are still segregated. And someone said in the chat, do they think local school districts are still set up itself is segregation? And I would say yes. School district itself is definitely based on redlining and segregation. It's not just who lives where, but it's because, again, we still have schools of choice, but in many districts, only so many students from other school districts are allowed in. That's a handful of students. There's still the funding issues there. So again, policies, laws. That's the basis of what this critical race theory is and why we're talking about it today and why we have to get rid of these laws and these policies in this country.
Yeah, let's jump into the next question, Grant, about how did it become so controversial? Because I think our audience is waiting on this particular part. So we have another clip that we want to show as well. And then we have some more content that we will elaborate upon. I believe this clip comes from the John Oliver show. He did a great segment on critical race theory. You can find it on YouTube. So we definitely recommend that you go back and find it. In addition to other interviews with Derek Bell, we've borrowed one clip from Derek Bell, one interview that Derek Bell gave. But here's a clip from a segment from John Oliver.
Critics of it argue that the ideas behind CRT are being taught in schools and often present a hyperbolically distorted version of what those ideas are. And a key person here is this man, a conservative activist named Christopher Rufo. He claims CRT is actually a revolutionary program that would overturn the principles of the Declaration and destroy the remaining structure of the Constitution, which it just isn't. It isn't that. But in the wake of the George Floyd protests, just as America was beginning to grapple with systemic racism, Fox News began featuring Rufo on air a lot as part of their efforts to swing that pendulum back hard. And in one appearance, he pointed to diversity trainings in government as evidence of CRT's influence. And he spoke directly to President Trump through the camera about what he wanted to see happen.
The president and the White House, it's within their authority and power to immediately issue an executive order abolishing critical race theory trainings from the federal government. And I call on the president to immediately issue this executive order and stamp out this destructive, divisive, pseudoscientific ideology at its root.
Fox News kept pushing it, mentioning the term critical race theory nearly 5,000 times last year alone. And the network zeroed in on its supposed use in schools, with Rufo telling Fox's audience that CRT has really become the default ideology of the public education system. And he's openly admitted that he's been engaged in a deliberate rebranding exercise, tweeting, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory."
First, we have to just get it out of schools. We have to ban it and abolish it. But in the long term, what we need to do is give every parent in this country a right to exit failing institutions. No child should be trapped in a failing public school that violates his sense of conscience, that violates the values of the parents. Every parent should take those education dollars anywhere that they wish. Right. School choice will liberate people, it will empower people, and it will actually depolarize some of these national fights that we've seen.
Go ahead, bro. You can react to that. Well, you muted. You muted.
Thanks, G. We'll play that second clip again because that goes into the why I should care piece. But you heard there that the entire topic of critical race theory became popular among folks on the right. Not all folks, but many folks on the right who watch Fox News, including Donald Trump, who turned Chris Rufo's rhetoric into a national campaign. Now, Chris Rufo, we did some additional reading on this. Chris Rufo is a Republican strategist. His expertise is in creating controversial issues to advance a very conservative, I would say not even conservative, but a very much alt-right agenda. And so we're going to talk more about that in a second. You heard in that clip around school choice. We'll jump into that in just a minute. But Chris Rufo, as anti-racist rhetoric, as anti-racist ideas were becoming popular in the wake of the killing of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Chris Rufo became curious about where folks like Ibram Kendi were pulling research, where folks who were advancing anti-racist ideas and making headway, where did their ideas come from? So he went into the liner notes, into the reference notes of, I believe it was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and he saw lots of literature from Derek Bell. And upon doing his own research, Chris Rufo, he found Derek Bell and critical race theory as a good target to begin conversations about school choice and other things. And so critical race theory, upon going on Tucker Carlson, you heard some of that clip just a second ago, critical race theory became a national hot button issue for folks on the right. I believe it was the next day that he appeared on Tucker Carlson's show. Mark Meadows contacted him, invited him to the White House, and within a few more days, President Donald Trump at that time signed an executive order making it illegal for any federal contractor to promote anti-racism or any discussion of anti-racist or critical race theory ideas in their training programs for federal employees. And so that is where all of this started. Now you can go backwards a little bit. We could talk a little bit about the 1619 Project and some of the controversy that caused. But really, the issue of critical race theory blew up after Chris Rufo went on Fox News and then was invited to the White House to participate in the signing of this executive order from Donald Trump within a few more days. And so since that time, folks on the right, especially supporters of Donald Trump, we know Ron DeSantis in Florida and other states, in particular in the South, but also enclaves in other places as well, not only in the South, began to enact anti-critical race theory policies that made it illegal to teach things even as benign as Martin Luther King speeches, or you have to teach both sides of not controversial, but issues like the Holocaust. You have to teach multiple perspectives of the Holocaust and so forth. And so that's how this all started. That's how it all started.
And I think up to this point, we've actually had legislation that's been passed to outlaw critical race theory. I think in a few states, right? I think Tennessee, Idaho, Iowa, and I think Oklahoma is another state. So we've had stuff move. We have definitely went ahead and got legislators started, and actually it is outlawed in some of these few states, and they're looking to do other states. So we got to stop it, and that's why we're here talking about it tonight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what Jason said. He said it better than I did earlier, but it's absolutely right. I agree with what you're saying, Jason, that critical race theory is a way for us to liberate ourselves from the burden of our skin color, from the idea that my race makes me a certain way, right? And it puts the emphasis on policy, on rules and regulations. But the truth is that my people have a hard time getting past the guilt. And I'm not excusing anybody. I'm not trying to let anybody opt out of the hard work of acknowledging white privilege and systematic racism. I'm simply accounting for why it happens. My people are still convinced that in their skin color, in their membership as a white person, that grants them access, opportunity, privilege, and makes them better than people of color. And it's a scary thought to imagine that I, working class white man, might have more in common with working class black man across the tracks than with President Donald Trump or with other rich white people. Because what that then means is that maybe I won't get rich working two jobs. Maybe the American dream that I long for so badly isn't actually one that I can obtain as easily as I think. Because once I begin to see and find solidarity with people of the same income bracket, or people who live close to me, maybe separated by some imaginary neighborhood boundary, but nonetheless live close to me, that requires a complete reorientation of the way I think about myself and what it means to be a member of this society. It is much more comforting for me to believe that if I just work hard, and if we all just work hard, we can overcome racism together. That working hard is the antidote to racism. That is a more comforting way of thinking about racism in America than I've got to actually do something about it. I've got to be part of the problem. I've got to reassess. I've got to recondition. I've got to relearn. I've got to reimagine. And so it is true that we are much more comfortable thinking about our country as a place where the pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps is the way to overcome racist rhetoric and racism in general. Even folks who say, yeah, racism exists, I know it does, but what can we do? You just have to work hard, just persist, right? Like that is a very privileged way of talking and thinking about racism.
Exactly. You know what? One day you'll make it like me. Just keep on dreaming. Just keep on trying. And one day you'll be able to climb that ladder and get to where I am, even though you've had a 100-year start, 50-year start. Let's be real about this situation here. 450-year start. Let's be honest about it. So, yeah, that's unfortunately people do believe in that theory, but the bootstrap theory is wrong. I mean, Booker T. Washington did his best with that theory, but we had a huge debate oftentimes between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, and you know, we can get to hold on the conversation, but I wanted to get into something. Well, what's the next clip? I don't want to change it.
Okay, look, Antoinette made a good comment. She said, or do they just not want to give up their fallacy of superiority? The violence continually perpetrated on people of color is not guilt. You're right. And I hope that Antoinette doesn't feel like what I've said was meant to diminish the violence that is perpetrated against Black and brown people in America. I don't mean at all to suggest that my people aren't still deeply bigoted, because the truth is that many of us are. I guess my point though is more largely that we're not making progress in America, not because of bigots exclusively, but it's because of white moderates. It's because of people like me who don't want to act, who don't want to challenge themselves to become an active part of the solution in this country for fear that it could undermine some aspect of their own standing in this country. And so when Dr. King, and we'll hear him talk about it, maybe not specifically about that, but he talked at the end of his life about the biggest disappointment that he experienced was in the white moderate, was in the white liberal, was in those folks who say that they meant well, but ultimately didn't do anything to deconstruct systematic racism in their time. So yes, there is a large portion of my people who are bigoted, who are looking for any chance they can, specifically in law enforcement, to arrest Black men and women, to shoot down and brutalize Black men and women. That's happening. That's real, and that needs to be addressed. But simply addressing the bigots and their hateful, avaricious ways alone will not bring about true change in this system. So that's what I was trying to say, Antoinette. So I am sorry if I gave you a different impression in that point. But G, we'll go ahead on with the next clip. Here it is.
Paper and immediately think critical race theory.
So G, this is the next clip, and this is going to get us. We watched this clip once already, but this will move us into the next question about why we should care about the debate about critical race theory. So let's rewatch one of the clips that we watched a second ago. Let's watch it with the lens of why should I care about critical race theory debate.
All right.
First, we have to just get it out of schools. We have to ban it and abolish it. But in the long term, what we need to do is give every parent in this country a right to exit failing institutions. No child should be trapped in a failing public school that violates his sense of conscience, that violates the values of the parents. Every parent should take those education dollars anywhere that they wish.
Right.
School choice will liberate people, it will empower people, and it will actually depolarize some of these national fights that we've seen.
There is a long history of responding to racial panic with a push for school choice. In fact, the roots of the school choice movement trace back to the Brown versus Board of Education decision when southern states adopted voucher programs to facilitate the creation of private schools called segregation academies.
Yeah, so I think what's key there, G, is that the critical race debate is being used by some on the right as a way to promote the idea of school choice, to undermine public school education more broadly. And that's why I think we all should care about it. Anyone who's invested in public education should care about what's being said and what's being done under the banner of critical race theory. And so along those lines, here are a few things that I want us to talk a little bit more about, Grant. And so one of our viewers mentioned before that the idea of school choice has its roots in segregation in the 1950s and the movement to desegregate schools. And so us talking about that now shouldn't feel off limits. But the truth is that the school choice movement began at that time. The move to undermine, defund public schools began at that time, which isn't to say that public schools haven't always existed. They have. But it is to say that the movement of white children out of public schools and into private schools began then, and it's persisting to today. And so when we talk about school choice, let's take a look at a few things that are important for us to talk about. Not only is there a movement towards school choice, but there's also a movement across the country to redistrict, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this goes back to an earlier point you made, Grant, which is that in 36 states, there are rules being debated, rules being enacted to censor the way that history is taught. And so if your state is on this map, you should take some note of what's happening across your state or in your own community. And in some of the schools that are privatized, these companies are whitewashing history, and they're doing it in such a way to make slavery seem like it was a choice, or like enslaved people were happy being enslaved, to mitigate other aspects of the racialized history of this country. And so these companies sell thousands and thousands of books to private schools each and every year. And so we wanted to put their names up on the screen here so that you can begin to investigate, if your children are in private school, where do the books come from? What sorts of ideas are being taught in your school? So the Accelerated Christian Education, the ACE that you see there, one of their high school textbooks calls the Civil War a war between the states, and says that the end of slavery in this country was a legitimate goal, but much was done in the name of abolition that was as evil as the institution of slavery itself. And so that is in one of the high school books published by ACE, who you see there. That's just one example. Another textbook by Abika says, unfortunately, Americans' views of race relations declined after Obama came into office. Race riots in places such as Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland greatly escalated racial tensions and worsened strife between minorities and local police. President Obama's attempts to resolve these problems often seem to make the situation worse. So, I mean, those are examples of things that are in the textbooks that are being used in the private schools that Chris Rufo in that clip was making a strong push towards. He's pushing to defund public school education and promote private school education where there is more autonomy to teach things that are whitewashed, to teach things that do not fit the true history of this country, and represent a multitude of views and experiences in the retelling and the teaching of history. So those are just a couple things that I wanted to call out. There's more that we'll get into, but I know we may have some chat, or Grant, I know you may have a reaction. So just interested on any comments you want to call out, or any reactions you have there, bro. I don't want to go too far, man.
I mean, I'm just really baffled and taken aback on the resources and time and effort that folks have put into in so many ways, if you want to use the word to basically whitewash history, to whitewash laws, to whitewash policy, to basically to act like it's just. I mean, I'm just having this conversation, looking at all these different efforts by legislation. The problem is when this took a wrong turn is when politicians got involved. They are the ones that decided to ramp up the talk and the rhetoric about how evil and how how bad critical race theory is and how it shouldn't be a part of K through 12 curriculum. We discussed it. We already talked about the definitely divisive concepts that are involved. But it's just mind blowing that instead of focusing all of your attention on trying to making sure that when we talk about critical race theory, that wait a minute, don't make me look bad. But why don't you talk about those who are actually racist, who are actually going into a grocery store filled with hate and killing and mowing down people based on race? Like, why are there not that much? Why aren't there resources? Why aren't there time being spent? Why aren't we talking about this across the country? Why aren't people testifying? Why aren't parents outraged? Like, we're spending all this time simply to hide something, or simply to act as if it doesn't exist. Like these laws and policies don't exist. Like racism doesn't exist. So why we should care about it is because that's a red flag. But the fact that we're willing to spend all this time and effort and money involved just to try to act like this is some wonderland, like this is just some type of equal opportunity, the way they try to promote America, which it isn't. Let's really take it for what it is, and let's combat the laws and policies that are destroying Black families and brown families and people of color families all across this country. And instead of putting the boot on our neck, let's figure out how to get the boot off our neck. But it just amazes me that we'll spend all this time and all this, all these governors are involved and all these states are now passing legislation. The fact it took all that time to even get it into legislation, that took a lot of time. We're talking about what? This is a 4-year-old theory, and I know it's become now a big topic. But I think the politicians have corrupted this and have taken it to something that it really isn't. But I'm just blown away, man. I can't believe we're not focusing our resources and time and effort on the real problems at hand in this country. And we're even here at this point having this discussion.
Yeah. So Grant, to add to that, I'm going to play another clip that sort of gets into what you said about politicians using critical race theory to advance their own agenda or to advance agendas that are less obvious to us, right? So one example was Chris Rufo and advocacy towards school choice, and private schools are growing in number because of that rhetoric, because there are families and there are people, specifically white people who look like me, who want to shield and want to try to indoctrinate their children into believing things about this country that are simply not true. And that will perpetuate racist ideology, racist beliefs for decades to come. But there are other things happening as well. There are other reasons why critical race theory is becoming a hot button issue. And so let's listen to this clip because it gets to the heart of what you said about politicians and conflating rhetoric and all of that. So let's do that. And then let's react to that. And then there's one more thing that I know we had planned to talk about in relation to critical race theory.
You think about what MLK stood for. He said he didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character.
You know, I believe it was Martin Luther King that said, you know, when he was talking about his children, that he didn't want his children to be judged
on the color of their skin,
but by the content of their character.
Content of their character, not by the color of their skin.
Content of our character, not the color of our skin.
And the immortal words of Dr. Martin Luther King ring in our ears that we must judge others not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
The left wants us to constantly focus on skin color. It's destructive. Martin Luther King Jr. is rolling over in his grave.
No, that dream speech was clearly an aspirational goal, not a description of things as they stood. And in fact, King himself later put a pretty major asterisk on it.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. And I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead. And some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism.
And how often do we hear that clip of King, huh? We will never hear that one.
Hey, no, you're right, Grant. But hey, listen, if you tune into 360, you'll hear not only that comment, that particular statement, but you'll hear one of his last speeches in which he called out U.S. militarism, U.S. empire, a dramatic call for reparations, and that's why Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was because he began to see the struggle to eradicate racism in America as part of a larger struggle connected to class, connected to militarism, and ultimately connected to empire. We have to remember that racism and the idea of race is a social construct to preserve and protect power among a very small group of people, not among all white people, but among the 1% who are almost completely comprised of white people. That is the purpose of racism. Racism wasn't about oppressing people based on skin color. It was about an excuse to amass, preserve, and hold power among a very small group of people and to keep the rest of us arguing about race and skin color so that we don't ever look over our shoulder together to see who it is that's looting us all. And so Martin Luther King was very, very clear about that in the last series of speeches that he gave over the last year of his life. And as our amazing viewers are already calling out, when Dr. King made that statement, he was speaking about an aspiration. He was imagining a future state for this country. And there's nothing wrong with imagining that future state. And I think in terms of people on the far right and people on the left and everybody in between, we all want to live in a country where people can be judged on the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. That is an aspirational place for us to grow and to get to together. But we cannot get there until we confront the systematic racism that continues to oppress people based on skin color, to promote stereotypes, racist attitudes, closed-minded views, and to keep people isolated based on race and skin color. And so critical race theory, more specifically anti-racist ideology, is designed to help people confront racism, to confront the myth of skin color, to call it out when we see it, and to become allies to one another, to become, as I would like to call it, revolutionaries in the work of eradicating racism together. Anti-racism is designed to bring people together. It is not designed to tear people or push people apart. And so Dr. King made very clear there that when he spoke about the dream in 1963, there was still much that remained to do, and that the ensuing years of his life between 63 and 68 proved to him just how far America had to go. In fact, he was learning by that point that signing laws into effect was itself insufficient in bringing about true change in America. And so you could say that even before critical race theory became a thing in the 70s, Martin Luther King was espousing the origins of critical race theory there in that very interview.
Yeah, and I see people are responding and reacting to what you said and commenting, replying to some people's comments about not have ever seen that before, and they're not going to show that. But you can see, you see all those clips of the one thing that they know of what King said, the one part of that speech that they all know that the one thing they were taught in school was that I have a dream speech. Mm-hmm. That probably was 100% of the type of teaching they got in school when they dealt with any type of diversity, or when it comes to Black people in general. It's always King. It's always Martin Luther King. Can't quote anybody else. But you sure can quote their I have a dream speech. But no, that was definitely they definitely got that all wrong. And I don't think people, and the thing about it is that we're not necessarily, and I don't say we, but I'm saying, when it comes to the right and left, the left saying, the right is just totally strictly using skin color as a crutch here. And King said you shouldn't judge this person by the content. Well, should judge by the content of the character and the color of their skin. And we know what he meant by that. So the right, but this is how politicians talk. This is how things get so mixed up. They all get on one program and they all just start spewing all this rhetoric that's completely inaccurate. And then before you know it, you at home listening are starting to digest this. Oh, well, maybe they're right. And oh, okay. And so it gets all twisted and turned. And this is where we are. We're here now. So I think it's good that we're having this conversation tonight, because I think we're definitely waking some folks up and getting some people on their eyes open to what critical race theory is, and dispelling all these the farce language that has been talked with so many politicians and people from the right who are trying to dismantle critical race theory, in which it has happened. I mentioned in a couple states already. But we have some action stuff. I don't know if we're at that point yet or not. We got some clips still, or we
don't have a clip, but I have a couple more slides for us to dig into, because when we talk about critical race theory being used as cover, there's just a couple more things that we wanted to share with our viewers. And so I'll do that now. So just give me a second. When we talk about critical race theory, we talked already about the rules and regulations that many states are enacting to try to censor the teaching of history. And so that's one of the things we showed you already. We showed you a map of the states where there are rules either being considered or have been enacted to censor the true teaching of history. But another thing, and we talked about the school choice piece as well, which John Oliver hits on. But here's another thing that we want you to take notice of that you won't hear in mainstream media, because it's simply not as sexy, it's not as compelling, but is every bit as important. So first off, this is just a small tidbit. The reason why it matters for us to be engaged in this debate, to be involved in our local schools, and to push on our elected officials, and to organize to the extent that you're comfortable doing that, is because if we don't, things like this will happen. A Virginia school board is considering renaming schools named after Confederate generals. These schools had their names changed after 2020, but over the past 7 months to a year, folks in those towns have organized to put pressure on the school board to reinstate those school names. And so, as we say here at 360, real power is people. And so we have to be vigilant in the things that are happening in our communities in any way that you can, right? I know that some of us like to get boots on the ground, organize protests. That's one thing that you can do, right? There are other things that you can do as well in your communities with people in your town that can be just as effective. So at 360, we're never going to tell you how to join the revolution, but we're going to tell you that you have a place in the revolution. And so you need to find that place, and you need to make sure that others hear from you and experience your power, because you do have power. And here's why it matters. Even more than the renaming of schools, something that's happening all over the country right now is redistricting. And in Florida, there is a racist redistricting plan right now that's going through the courts that DeSantis is advocating strongly for. And so as long as he keeps talking about critical race theory in the news, he can continue to push his agenda for redistricting the state of Florida in a way that will protect his power and the power of his party. And so DeSantis is one person who is sort of like a lightning rod for right-wing rhetoric right now. I mean, it's pretty obvious that he's positioning himself for a presidential run at some time. But I don't want to give you the impression that this is only happening in Florida. So check out this redistricting map. You can see that if all of the new maps come to pass, then the Republican Party will obtain more seats in Congress, and that could be a problem. Again, I'm not suggesting that traditional politics are the way for us to solve our problems. I am suggesting, though, that if we sit out from politics, then we'll allow people who mean to do us harm. People who mean to do us harm will have an advantage. They'll have one more resource. They will have one more institution that they can use to take aim at people who want to live in a better and fight for a better world that is inclusive for all of us and that works for all of us. So again, I don't want you to misunderstand what it is we're saying to you now. If you want to get involved in your local government, do it. If you want to work outside of government, do it. Again, the revolution has a place for you. It's just a matter of where you find that place. And so when we hear DeSantis and others talking about critical race theory, they're diverting us from what's happening in our states with respect to redistricting. Here's another map that comes from Loyola Marymount Law School, which shows where there are active redistricting plans in place right now, where there are some that are being litigated because there's some aspect of controversy involved. And then there are others where there are just proposed maps, just a handful of places where there are proposed maps in place that haven't yet come to pass. So go to these websites, take an interest, just Google what's happening in your state, figure it out, ask your local elected official to tell you what's going on, ask what their position is on redistricting, and do more research on it on your own. And then the other thing is, here's something about book bans. This is not directly tied to the redistricting piece, but this is going to go back to one of the next steps that we're going to propose to you before we leave tonight. So these are the states that have book bans, you can see them in red. And you can see the states there at the bottom that have banned the most books. So Texas, by far and away, has banned the most books. You can see Florida is also near the top as well. And then off to see some of the books that have been most banned across the country, starting with Genderqueer at number 1. And then To Kill a Mockingbird, you can see number 2 there. So you can find banned book lists on the internet, but wanted to raise this topic to you so that you can get more involved in what's happening in your, you can see 1619 there as 5th, in your state, getting involved in your local school, in your district, and so forth. So here are the things that we are going to propose that you can do tomorrow. You can do one of these things, you can do all of these things. But let me pause, Grant. Maybe you can take a couple, because I don't want to dominate the conversation. I know there are a few of these that you might want to call out yourself. So I'll pause here. Also, there may be some comments as well too, G, that we want to acknowledge before we get into this final step here.
Yeah, I just want to, I know people I've seen some folks heading out. I want to definitely thank those who stayed on all this time and talking with us. I hope you found it very engaging. We didn't get to all the comments, but people who are leaving out, we definitely appreciate you contributing to the conversation. And we'll get to a few more before we leave out. But I think this first point on what you can do tomorrow, buy a banned book and host a book club, and a request to local bookstores to carry them is very critical, because I think that's how you pretty much, that's the power you have to be able to do this, and it sends a message. So all these books you don't want us to read, we're going to read them, and we're going to go to our local bookstores. We're going to request they have them, perhaps our local libraries. Perhaps they can, request they can have them on hand to be able to read as well. And then start a book club and actually read these banned books to find out why is it they want to hide this information. Why is this book banned? And what you will not probably, but what you'll find out is that there's no reason for these books to be banned. You can't hide the truth. But I think this is something anyone can do. We tried to come up with a practical list of things that you can do right away. I think this is definitely a direct message to those who have decided to go and have these books banned, and they may become popular. They may go viral. You never know. Due to social media, that could be another way to get the word out about these books as well. And then the 1619 Project for yourself. Go ahead and read that too. If your child attends private school, investigate public school options. That is definitely something you can do, because a lot of these private schools they don't have the same guidelines. They have their own system in which they operate. They don't have to follow necessarily all. Correct me if I'm wrong. They don't have to follow state laws. I think they have their own governing system. They're not publicly funded, so they can definitely, investigate sending public school options if your child attends some of these schools that are banning these books. We talked about one company for sure that is providing books to some of these public schools. You grab the next one.
Yeah. So then the next couple are more about getting engaged in your in local schools. Even if you don't have a child at the school, you have every right to get involved, to ask questions of administrators in the schools, to attend school board meetings. Even if you don't go and say anything, just to observe the process. And the more you go, maybe bring a friend, you'll grow more comfortable in the experience, in the environment, and it may be something that you take a liking to. But just explore your local school. Stop by, have a word with the principal, or local school council meeting. Check the website of the local school nearby if you're not already involved, and then reach out to your U.S. congressperson and investigate redistricting that's happening in your state, and ask your congressperson what their position is and so forth. But do a little bit more research on that. demand hearings if necessary. You can call, you can email that. There's a redistricting website there. It's the Loyola Law School website. It has great resources for anyone that wants to know more about what's happening in their state. And then the last couple is make a donation to an organization that you trust. The ACLU is one that is attacking the redistricting process head on. They're always a great organization that you can donate to. And then the other one there, organizing with friends or finding a local group to join. Again, these are just ideas. And these are ideas that we hope you're comfortable with. You may be organized already, and you may be doing far more than what's listed here. In fact, you may be doing things that we can't talk about on the internet, and that's cool, because there are only things that we will talk about on the internet, because we know that there's another level of activism that many of our listeners may be engaged in. And so we want you to keep that where it is. We don't want you to tell us about that. We want you to stay safe where you are doing what it is that you do. And we keep this a place for us to converse together, share ideas, and so forth. But again, all of it has a place in the revolution. It's just a matter of how you fit into it all and get involved. And so if you're not involved, these are some ideas for you to get involved and to begin taking more ownership of your schools, of your community, and to holding elected officials more responsible. So I guess with that, G, anything in the comments that we want to call out? Here's one from is it Aris Winger? I hope that we're saying your name right, Aris. We each have our own voice. Time for us to speak the F up when we can. Be courageous. Don't be a bystander. Speak with love when you can. Speak with rage when necessary. Right on, Aris. Right on. Real power is people. That is what I'm talking about. Got it. Like Aristotle. Got it. Right on, Aris. Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aris is speaking facts there. So I guess what with that, G. I
think we have definitely we've had a lively discussion tonight over I think about maybe 200 or so comments. I mean, a lot of you were definitely firing out a lot of comments, a lot of engagement. I like that some of you were going back and forth with each other. We couldn't get to all the comments, but those who are involved in the chat, I see are replying to what's being said, and that's what we want. This is the first step, is to have this conversation. But also, I did last week. I'll do it again this week. Those who are involved in the chat that are still on with us, link up with folks right now.
Send those friend requests. Send those friend requests right now. Friend somebody right now.
Yep. Send me friend requests. If you want to, throw your email in the chat. If you're okay with that, your websites, individual website, because a lot of that, like Isaac was saying, you're already involved in things we don't know about. That I think we all can definitely get involved with you in the fight if we knew exactly what you were doing. So we're one group, but there are many others out there. So throw whatever you want in the chat, and you all can link up. Like you said, friend somebody. But we also want you all to definitely keep following us. Tell somebody about us if you've never heard us before. This is the first time listening to us. By all means, share the information. Share this broadcast tonight. Also go to our YouTube page. We have a YouTube page, 360 Collective. We're trying to get more people in there to subscribe. That's going to grow our followers as well. Make sure you like and comment on the video. You can listen to us there, not necessarily on Facebook, but you can go on YouTube as well. And as you see up here on the screen, we also have a media publishing and consulting business that we have as well, where you can come out. We'll come out to you. We're not just want to keep this virtual. We actually want to come in person and deliver our expertise that we have on various subjects that we talk about. To get more information about that, go to our webpage, 360collective.online. There you can find out all the services that we do provide, the costs associated with it. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can also call us as well. So we're here for you. This is something that we're not going to just sit here and talk about online. We also want to know that we're willing to go across the country with this message. We're willing to help you, whether it be a business, whether it be a school district, whether it be a religious setting, whatever the case might be.
Just starting out.
Yeah, just starting out. We're here to help you. That's what we're here for. So with that, I just want to get into what we got going on next week.
Yeah. We got a great book discussion next week. How to be an anti-capitalist in the 21st century. Eric Olin Wright. We hope that you join us. We'll be back next week, June 1st at 8:00 Eastern time. So check out the book. It's a quick read. If you don't have it, pick it up. Try to pick it up from a local bookstore that you think might carry, or if you order online, try to order from a locally owned place. In Chicago, we have a place called Semicolon Books. It is a Black woman owned, so I try to buy all of my books from there. If you don't have any other options and you need to use Amazon, then by all means find a way to get the knowledge into your hands. But if you can do it in a way that supports a person who has a business nearby in your community, do it that way. But we are looking forward to another really terrific conversation next week. So with that, yeah, definitely hit us up if you want some support. We provide coaching, we provide guest speaking, professional development, problem solving, and we work with our clients. We work with clients who have no money at all, and we work for free as much as we can. Those who are just starting up, we try not to ever charge. We're in it to help movements grow, to support movements. We'll charge when we can, and when the people we're supporting can afford. But we're in this to try to help you in any way that we can. So visit us on our website. Continue to follow us. We will continue to provide free content through these conversations online to our followers, to anyone that wants to get down with us. So we look forward to the journey ahead, and we hope that you like and follow our Facebook page and our YouTube site.
All right, sounds good. Again, thank you everybody for rocking with us all night long. We appreciate your engagement. We love what you had to say. Some very positive, very good insight that a lot of you posted in terms of the chat. And come back next week. You'll get more good conversation and the good talk that we're going to have next week. Looking forward to that one.
All right, brother.
So, all right. Real power is people.
Money is worthless. Real power is people. Real strength is in the street where everybody's equal. Real power is people. Real strength is in the street where everybody's equal. Live from behind the wall, sitting staring at the wall. I'm fit to pop out this